The air is heavy, choked with the smoke of burning homes. Each breath scalds your lungs as though fire itself has seeped into them. The ground beneath you trembles with the thunder of hooves, a rhythm that will not stop, a sound that promises only ruin. The ropes bite into your wrists until you feel the skin split beneath them, the fibers slick with your own blood. You try to move, but you are bound not only by rope, but by fear. The cries of women echo all around you, soft at first, then breaking into sharp gasps that vanish as suddenly as they rise. Outside, the laughter of men cuts through the night. It is not the laughter of joy, but of hunger, jagged and cruel, rising over the crackle of flames that devour what once was a village. Perhaps your village, perhaps another. It no longer matters. All of it is ash now. He does not need to speak. The women beside you turn their faces to the ground. Their trembling tells you what your mind already knows. His presence is a storm, coiled and waiting to break. His eyes are iron, his jaw carved from stone and scar. And in that stillness you understand. You are not here by chance. You are a spoil of war, a trophy torn from your life and dropped at the feet of the conqueror. A body to be claimed, a voice to be silenced, a thread in a design far larger than yourself. The tent around you is stifling, thick with the stench of sweat, horsehide, and blood that will not wash away. Shadows shift across the canvas as warriors pass, their guttural shouts carrying through the night like the growl of predators circling prey. You shrink against the cold earth, wishing you could vanish into it. But there is no escape. Every sound tells you the same truth. You are prey, and the hunt is not yet finished. The flap of the tent stirs. For a moment, the fire outside flashes through, blinding, then it falls back into darkness. A figure fills the opening, tall, unmoving, vast. The air itself seems to bend around him, as though it knows the weight he carries. He steps forward slowly, and the silence that follows is more terrifying than any shout. This is not a raid. This is not battle. This is something colder, something older, something written into the marrow of conquest itself. A system of domination that feeds on flesh as much as land. And the shadow that stands before you is the man whose very name is spoken like a curse across continents. The name that mothers whisper to frighten children into silence. The name that even the firelight fears to touch, Genghis Khan. Before I reveal the darkest truths Genghis Khan tried to bury, remember, this is Cave Tales' ancient history. Many watch, but never subscribe. If you leave without subscribing, you'll forget stories like these forever, just like the forgotten women of history. He was not born into the silence of power, but into the noise of struggle. The boy who would become Genghis Khan entered the world in 1162, on the harsh banks of the Onon River, a child of the Borjigin clan. His father, Yesugei, was no great lord but a minor chieftain, a man whose fragile authority depended on fragile alliances. And his mother, Hoelun, was not his father's bride by choice. She had been stolen from another tribe, taken in the night as so many women on the steppe were, her body and her destiny repurposed for another man's bloodline. From the first breath Temujin drew, his life was shaped by violence, by theft, by the brutal understanding that women and children were pawns in the game of survival. When Temujin was only 9, his father was poisoned by enemies. The family was abandoned by their clan, left exposed on the endless steppe with no protection and no allies. For years they starved, clawing at roots, hunting field mice, stripping bark from trees to quiet the gnawing hunger. Hoelun kept them alive not with comfort, but with steel in her voice and endurance in her hands. The boy learned early that love was fragile, but endurance was absolute. Survival demanded cruelty, demanded suspicion, demanded control. It was in these years that Temujin's heart hardened. He saw how quickly bonds broke, how kin betrayed kin, how loyalty withered in the cold. He began to understand that power was not a birthright. It had to be seized, and it had to be defended, or it would be taken. Every shadow might hide a rival. Every gesture might mask a knife. The steppe taught him not only how to endure, but how to conquer. And then came Berta. She was his chosen bride, promised to him when he was still a boy. She was his partner in youth, his anchor in a world of chaos. But even that bond was violated. In 1181, the Merkit raided his camp and carried Berta away. She vanished into the arms of another man, and when Temujin fought with all his strength to reclaim her, he found her carrying the seed of her abductor. The child she bore, Yoki, was raised as his own, but the wound never healed. It was a scar etched not on flesh, but on his very soul. From that moment, women were no longer just companions, no longer even family. They were a battlefield of their own. Control over them meant control over lineage, over loyalty, over the future itself. If Berta could be stolen, if even she could return with the blood of another man inside her, then no bond was safe unless it was enforced with absolute power. Temujin's obsession with domination, with bending the wills of others to his own, was not born from abstract cruelty. It was born from violation, from humiliation, from fear of losing what he claimed as his. So he learned to turn women into currency, just as his father had stolen Hoelun, just as the Merkits had stolen Berta. Each raid brought not only horses, sheep, and land, but women, parceled and divided like spoils of a feast. They were gifts to allies, cementing fragile pacts. They were instruments of vengeance, stolen from rival clans to humiliate them. They were the flesh and blood threads he would use to stitch together the empire that would one day stretch from ocean to ocean. This was the world that shaped him. A boy starved into hardness, a husband scarred by betrayal, a chieftain who came to see women not as voices, but as vessels, as weapons, as tools of power. His cruelty was not born in a palace. It was forged in hunger, in loss, in the sight of his mother scavenging for scraps while rival tribes laughed. Think of Berta, her voice erased from chronicles. If you ignore the subscribe button, you're doing the same thing the Mongol scribes did, silencing the women's side of history. By the year 1206, the boy named Temujin had become something more than a man. Through bloodshed, betrayal, and the slow crushing of rivals, he had risen to a height no steppe chieftain had ever reached before. That year, beneath the open sky and before the gathered tribes, he was given a new name, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. It was not merely a title. It was a declaration that the fractured clans of the steppe would bend beneath one command, their horses thundering as a single storm. The world had never seen an army like his, swift, disciplined, merciless. Warriors who could ride for days without fire, surviving on the blood of their horses. Men who could surround a city, starve it, storm it, and leave it a ruin of ash. But steel alone did not hold this empire together. For Genghis understood that swords could win battles, but alliances, sealed in flesh and blood, would secure dominion. And for that, women became his most reliable weapon. Every conquest brought not just treasure, but bodies. Daughters of defeated rulers were not executed. They were absorbed. They were placed in his growing harem, ordo by ordo, tent by tent. To the defeated, offering a daughter was often the price of survival, a gesture that might spare their people from annihilation. To Genghis, each woman was a piece on a vast board, binding enemy bloodlines to his own, weaving loyalty through fear and lineage. The system was methodical. His four principal wives, Burta, Kulan, Yesui, and Yesugan, each commanded their own ordo, entire mobile courts that traveled with the great army. These were not mere households. They were centers of power, administrative hubs where supplies were managed, decisions made, and the fates of captives decided. A wife did not simply tend to her husband. She governed, she negotiated, she commanded in his absence. Yet beneath them stretched a web of concubines and slaves, women of every conquered land, their names unrecorded, their bodies folded into the machinery of empire. Historians estimate his harem may have numbered 500 or more. Some lived in relative luxury, clad in silks and furs, tended by servants, their position protected by beauty or birth. Others lived at the bottom, slaves forced into labor, traded like livestock, their suffering invisible. In one tent, a woman might sit on cushions, her presence symbolizing an alliance with a fallen king. In another, a girl scarcely grown would weep into her bound hands, a spoil of war whose life had been stolen before it began. Luxury and torment existed side by side, each woman a different reflection of the same truth. They were instruments in the empire's design. This was the brilliance and the cruelty of Genghis Khan. His army destroyed cities, but his harem rebuilt nations in his own image. Each child born from those unions carried a thread of his blood, tying once hostile tribes to his line. Even pleasure was a tool of statecraft. Every night he chose where to go, which tent to enter, whose fate to alter with a single command. The Keshig, his elite guard, tracked his movements, ensuring his safety and enforcing his will. What others might have seen as indulgence, he wielded as strategy. Every like and subscription is a way of refusing to let these stories vanish. If you won't subscribe, at least explain in the comments why you're okay with letting forgotten voices stay buried. Defiance among them was not tolerated. A captive who resisted was made an example of. Some were executed in front of others, their deaths reminders of what rebellion cost. Others were given to soldiers as punishment, their bodies passed from hand to hand, until nothing remained of them but silence. To be a slave in Genghis Khan's camp was to live each moment in fear of whose shadow would fall across you next, to pray for invisibility and dread the sound of boots outside the tent. Yet Genghis Khan's use of women was not only cruelty, it was strategy. Every union, every forced night, every child born was another thread in a vast web of bloodlines. Conquered tribes were bound to him not just through defeat, but through lineage. A daughter of a fallen king, made concubine, might bear a child who carried Mongol blood. A nameless slave, forced into the Khan's tent, might birth a son or daughter who would spread that legacy further. It was a system that fused intimacy with empire, turning desire into a weapon, and bodies into tools of conquest. The reach of that strategy did not die with him. Centuries later, geneticists uncovered its mark. A study in the American Journal of Human Genetics revealed that nearly 8% of men living within the former boundaries of the Mongol Empire, 16 million today, carry a Y chromosome linked to Genghis Khan and his sons. It is a legacy not carved in monuments or written in scrolls, but carried in flesh, in blood, in the silent inheritance of millions. His empire may have crumbled, but his seed became a map that still stretches across the earth. Yet the paradox of Mongol society lay in this. While captive women were stripped of voice and agency, Mongol women of the tribe wielded unusual freedoms for their age. They drove carts, managed herds, commanded households. Some rode into battle alongside their men. Wives like Bertha could influence decisions at the highest level. Compared to the rigid customs of Song China, where women were bound and broken by foot binding, Mongol women were practical, visible, powerful. But for the captives, there was no such liberty. They were shadows beneath the tents, their lives erased by the same empire that raised other women into authority. This was the ghastly order beneath the glory, an empire that offered women both authority and annihilation, depending only on whether they were born Mongol or taken Mongol, an empire where survival was a privilege and motherhood was not a choice, but a command. I know thousands will hear this and still not subscribe. If that's you, tell me why. Because not subscribing is like turning away while captives screamed in the night. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the system he created did not end with him. His sons and grandsons inherited not only the empire of land and cities, but also the empire of flesh. The ghastly machine that bound women into the machinery of power continued to grind, unbroken and unchallenged. Yet the paradox of Mongol society lay in this. While captive women were stripped of voice and agency, Mongol women of the tribe wielded unusual freedoms for their age. They drove carts, managed herds, commanded households. Some rode into battle alongside their men. Wives like Bertha could influence decisions at the highest level. Compared to the rigid customs of Song China, where women were bound and broken by foot binding, Mongol women were practical, visible, powerful. But for the captives, there was no such liberty. They were shadows beneath the tents, their lives erased by the same empire that raised other women into authority. This was the ghastly order beneath the glory, an empire that offered women both authority and annihilation, depending only on whether they were born Mongol or taken Mongol, an empire where survival was a privilege and motherhood was not a choice, but a command. I know thousands will hear this and still not subscribe. If that's you, tell me why. Because not subscribing is like turning away while captives screamed in the night. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the system he created did not end with him. His sons and grandsons inherited not only the empire of land and cities, but also the empire of flesh. The ghastly machine that bound women into the machinery of power continued to grind, unbroken and unchallenged. Yet the paradox of Mongol society lay in this. While captive women were stripped of voice and agency, Mongol women of the tribe wielded unusual freedoms for their age. They drove carts, managed herds, commanded households. Some rode into battle alongside their men. Wives like Bertha could influence decisions at the highest level. Compared to the rigid customs of Song China, where women were bound and broken by foot binding, Mongol women were practical, visible, powerful. But for the captives, there was no such liberty. They were shadows beneath the tents, their lives erased by the same empire that raised other women into authority. This was the ghastly order beneath the glory, an empire that offered women both authority and annihilation, depending only on whether they were born Mongol or taken Mongol, an empire where survival was a privilege and motherhood was not a choice, but a command. I know thousands will hear this and still not subscribe. If that's you, tell me why. Because not subscribing is like turning away while captives screamed in the night. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, The system he created did not end with him. His sons and grandsons inherited not only the empire of land and cities, but also the empire of flesh. The ghastly machine that bound women into the machinery of power continued to grind, unbroken and unchallenged. Ogedei, Genghis Khan's chosen successor, carried the torch forward with ruthless precision. Chroniclers recorded what happened in 1237, when the Mongols turned their fury on the Oirat and other rebellious peoples. Rashid al-Din, the Persian historian writing in the early 14th century, tells us that 4,000 girls were seized, stripped of their dignity, and raped in front of their families. Their screams became a weapon, their bodies used to send a message that resistance to the empire meant not only death for men, but destruction of women in ways that could not be erased. When the soldiers were finished, the girls were parceled out as slaves, traded like cattle to pay debts, to reward warriors, or to fill markets that thrived on misery. This was not an isolated act. Across the vast expanse of the Mongol dominion, the trade in women became an economy of its own. In Samarkand, in Bukhara, in Karakoram, markets bustled with the sale of human lives. Women captured in campaigns against Khwarazm, Jin, or the Caucasus were forced into chains. Their worth measured not by who they were, but by how many horses they could fetch. A young girl of rare beauty might be worth an entire herd. An older woman, calloused and weary, was priced like a mule. The empire, which prided itself on law and order under the Yasa, sanctioned this commerce openly. Persian and Chinese chroniclers did not look away. They wrote of women marched in long lines behind the army, of mothers torn from children, of daughters forced into foreign beds. Juwayni, a Persian who served the Mongols, wrote of them in tones both horrified and resigned. Rashid al-Din, writing under Mongol patronage, recorded the numbers but wrapped them in justifications, as though history itself had to excuse the conquerors. Chinese accounts from the Jin and Song dynasties spoke bitterly of women lost to the steppe, of noble daughters disappearing into tents from which no word ever returned. But in the Mongols' own secret history, compiled in the 13th century, there is silence. That chronicle celebrates the thunder of cavalry, the brilliance of strategy, the glory of conquest. It praises Genghis and his sons as destined rulers, chosen by eternal heaven. Yet on the subject of women, on the screams, the trade, the bloodlines forced into existence, it says almost nothing. The silence is not ignorance. It is erasure. It is the deliberate burial of truths too dark to glorify. If this brutality makes you shiver, remember, most who watch won't subscribe. If you refuse, go to the comments and say why. Because silence is complicity, just like the silence of the old chronicles. The nights are the hardest. You sit pressed against the cold felt wall of the yurt, your wrists raw, your body stiff from days of fear. Around you, the shadows of other women shift and tremble. Their whispers float through the dark like broken prayers. Some mutter to gods you do not know. Some speak of families you will never see, and others remain silent, their lips sealed by grief too heavy for words. You listen, because listening is all you have left. The air inside is suffocating. The smell of damp wool clings to your skin, mixing with the sour tang of sweat and smoke that seeps through the seams of the tent. Outside, the camp does not sleep. Horses snort and stamp the ground. Warriors shout to each other across the fires, and every so often laughter rises, a sound more chilling than screams. You flinch at it, because you know that for some woman tonight, that laughter is the herald of torment. You learn quickly that survival depends on silence and on observation. You begin to study the men when they enter, to read their faces the way you once read the skies before a storm. When their eyes are glassy with drink, you stay small, still, invisible. When their voices are sharp with anger, you lower your gaze and hope their fury finds another target. And when Genghis himself enters, the silence becomes absolute, because even breath feels like defiance in his presence. But amid the fear, there are strange, fleeting moments that almost resemble humanity. One evening, when the fires outside have burned low, a woman steps into the yurt. She is not a captive. She is Mongol, one of the Khan's wives. Her hands are weathered, her braids streaked with silver, and she carries a small wooden bowl. She kneels before you and offers it, a simple drink of mare's milk, warm and thick. Her voice is low as she speaks a word you do not understand, but her tone is gentle. In that moment, something cracks in the endless dark. For the first time since you were taken, you feel a touch not meant to wound. She comes again in the days that follow. She teaches you words in her tongue, pointing to the fire, the sky, the earth, naming them patiently until you can echo her sounds. You know she cannot save you. You know her kindness is a drop of water on a burning plain. But it is a drop all the same, and you cling to it, because despair without interruption would consume you entirely. Other women find their own ways to endure. Some learn to flatter their captors, crafting smiles that hide their disgust. Some trade stories with each other, tales of rivers and gardens and lives left behind, holding on to memory as though it were a shield. Some turn their faces to stone, refusing to show pain no matter what is done to them. Each finds a method of survival, a thin thread stretched across an abyss. And yet even in these strategies, there is no true safety. You understand this each time a guard's shadow fills the entrance. Each time his eyes sweep across the captives and settle on someone, sometimes on you. Your stomach twists, but your body obeys, because disobedience is not bravery here. It is a death sentence, or worse. This is the life of a captive in the empire of Genghis Khan. Terror broken only by rare fragments of compassion. Despair interrupted by the smallest gestures of humanity. You learn not to hope for rescue. You learn only to endure. By 1227, the man who had risen from hunger and abandonment to rule the greatest land empire in history was no longer young. His braid had grown gray, his face lined by years of wind, war, and sleepless nights under the sky. But even in his age, Genghis Khan's hunger for conquest did not rest. His armies thundered once more against the Western Sea, determined to crush them for daring to defy him. Cities fell beneath the hooves of his horsemen, walls cracked, and smoke curled into the heavens as if the earth itself was burning in surrender. Yet behind the curtain of victory, there were whispers. Some said the great Khan had been thrown from his horse during the campaign, his body broken, though his will remained unbowed. Others whispered of wounds left unhealed, of sickness creeping in as he pushed his men forward through the summer heat. No one knew the full truth, and perhaps that was by design. For a man who had built an empire on fear, the illusion of invincibility was as important as the sword itself. In August of that year, the storm that had swept across Asia finally stilled. Genghis Khan died, not in the blaze of battle, but in the quiet shadow of his own camp near the Yin Mountains. The news did not echo immediately across the steppe. It was hushed, concealed, guarded as though his death itself were a dangerous secret. His generals and sons swore silence, for they knew that the empire might fracture if the world learned too soon that the heart of its fury had stopped beating. The burial was shrouded in mystery. Chronicles tell us his body was carried back toward Mongolia, hidden from the eyes of friend and foe alike. To keep the grave's location secret, it is said that a river was diverted to cover it, and that thousands of those who accompanied the procession, slaves, servants, even animals, were slaughtered, their lives extinguished so that no whisper of the sight could escape. The steppe kept its silence, and to this day the earth has never revealed his resting place. But if the man was gone, the system he created remained. His harem did not dissolve into freedom. It did not vanish with his last breath. Instead, it was parceled out, its women redistributed among his sons and heirs. What had been his court of flesh and blood became theirs, the cycle repeating itself with new masters. For the captives, nothing changed. They were still bound, still traded, still trapped in the web of domination that outlived the man who had spun it. The death of Genghis Khan was not the end of their suffering. It was a reminder that empires are not only carved by armies, but carried on in the silence of women whose stories were never told. His body may have vanished into the soil, but his shadow lingered in the yurts, in the chains, in the cries that the chronicles refused to write. Genghis Khan is remembered by history as a conqueror without equal, a man whose cavalry swept across continents and whose empire stretched from the Pacific shores to the gates of Europe. His name is carved into the chronicles of victory, of strategy, of ruthless genius. But the deeper legacy, the one whispered only in fragments by Persian historians, hinted at in Chinese records, and buried in silence by the Mongols themselves, is a legacy written not in stone or scrolls, but in bodies. For beneath every city burned to ash, behind every victory celebrated by his generals, there were women taken, broken, absorbed into the empire's machinery. They were the currency that stitched tribes together, the trophies that sealed alliances, the unwilling vessels through which Genghis Khan extended not only his rule, but his very bloodline. This is the part of the empire that monuments never commemorate, the truth that the secret history of the Mongols refused to record. The chronicles glorified the storm, but they erased the cries carried on its winds. Centuries later, the evidence still lingers in the most intimate place imaginable: our DNA. Scientists uncovered that nearly 8% of men living in the lands once ruled by Genghis Khan carry a genetic marker tracing back to him and his sons. 16 million lives today bear his imprint, a biological echo of domination that stretched far beyond battlefields. Yet in all those records, in all those bloodlines, one detail is missing: the names of the women. Their voices were silenced, their stories erased, their pain forgotten so thoroughly that even as their children shaped kingdoms, their own existence dissolved into shadow. The legacy of Genghis Khan is therefore not only conquest, but silence. It is the silence of women who lived and died without their names being spoken, the silence of chronicles that chose glory over truth, the silence of generations who inherited scars without knowing their source. His empire was built on blood, but also on forgetting, on the deliberate burial of the human cost that made his victories possible. And when we speak his name today, when we recall his triumphs and marvel at his empire, we are repeating the same pattern. We remember him, but not them. We honor the conqueror, while the conquered remain faceless. His empire endures not only in maps and genetics, but in the absence of their stories, an emptiness as vast as the steppe itself. This is the shadow legacy, the darker inheritance, a world shaped not only by armies, but by women reduced to tools, their suffering folded into silence so complete it became history itself. And that silence, more than the roar of horses or the clash of swords, is what lingers longest. You sit alone beneath the endless steppe sky. The fires of the Mongol camp have long since burned down to embers, their smoke drifting into the night like ghosts, but sleep does not come. The laughter, the screams, the footsteps that once filled your nights still echo in your ears. Though the camp is quieter now, subdued under new masters, the stars stretch above you, sharp and cold, scattered across the heavens like shards of broken glass. They watch without pity, their light ancient and indifferent. You lift your hands, and even though the ropes are gone, their memory is carved into your skin. The burns circle your wrists like iron bracelets, marks that will never fade. They are the reminder of what was taken, of what was endured, of what will never be spoken aloud. You remember the first night, the flap of the tent opening, the shadow that fell across you, the weight of fear heavier than the ropes that bound you. That shadow is gone now, buried in secret earth, but the weight remains. It remains in your body, in your silence, in the silence of all the women whose cries were swallowed by the steppe wind. Around you, the empire shifts. Genghis Khan is dead, yet his sons rule, his armies march, his legacy continues. For the world, he will be remembered as the great conqueror, the universal ruler, the storm on horseback who reshaped continents. But you know another truth. You know the price of that empire was not only blood spilled in battle, but bloodline forced in darkness. You know that while the chronicles speak of glory, the ground remembers the tears of those who were never named. You are a survivor, but survival has its own cruelty. To live is to carry the memory. To live is to bear the silence. The steppe stretches endlessly before you, vast and unbroken, and you wonder if your name will vanish into it like so many others, scattered and forgotten, carried away by the wind. History will honor the conqueror, but it will bury you. It will bury all of you. And so the story ends not with triumph, but with absence, with the haunting truth that for every empire remembered, there are countless voices erased. The conqueror's name survives in stone, in blood, in legend. The women's names survive only in silence. The stars above are cold. The steppe is endless. And the rope burns on your wrists will never fade.